The latest 4 episodes of The Middle that I've just watched are very, very strong. I have no points of criticism with these episodes. These are fabulous. This is Season 2, episodes 15, 16, 17, and 18. And as always, I will go through the episodes, share some thoughts, so there will be spoilers from now. And the first one, Season 2, episode 15, Friends, Lies, and Videotape, is directed by Alex Reid. And we have several parts of the narrative. One involves Axel, and he wants their teacher to be in their music video. So he records Mrs. Devereaux, played by Kristen Cavallari, without her knowing. And that's not great. But we get to see the final video. Not quite what was expected, but good fun and ultimately an enjoyable part of the narrative. Part of it focuses on Sue. She wants to see an R-rated movie. And of course, she's told no. But Sue and Carly pretend to be adults, and their conversation is so funny. Really thoroughly enjoyed it, and it worked. They got the ticket to the film. And then Frankie finds the ticket in her sweater because Sue borrowed Frankie's sweater. And Mike and Frankie realise they don't know how to punish Sue because they've never had to punish her before. She's a great kid, but nevertheless, Mike goes to speak with her to punish her, and immediately Sue breaks down. She's horrified by her own actions. She demands more and more punishment. And it's it's funny, and she also unveiled the hole that she and Brick did a couple of episodes earlier. So I thought that was very funny, very well executed, and a great lesson that you probably shouldn't try and sneak into a film you're not old enough for, because if you're like Sue, at least, the guilt will eat away at you. Very funny, really thoroughly enjoyed it. And then we have Brick. Brick is the only one in his class who is not moving ahead in the social skills group. And Frankie tries to engage him in play. She's hula hooping, she's pogo sticking, she's skipping, and it's not working. So then she concludes that maybe Brick's happy and he doesn't want a friend, so why try and force it? And as soon as she comes to that conclusion, Brick pops in the doorway and says that he wants a friend. So Frankie, in a very creepy series of clips, she starts approaching these kids, these random kids, trying to get them to be Brick's friend, which is, well, good on the kids for yelling stranger danger. And eventually she finds a friend for Brick. This is Gerald, played by Andrew Astor, and he comes for a play date and it goes really well, and Brick and Frankie are really, really happy. And then Gerald's been sick for a few days, so he hasn't called. Yeah, right. I think it was very obvious when I assume it was his mother on the phone, said that he was sick, that he hadn't been. They'd just been avoiding, well, Frankie actually, not Brick. We learn later on when Frankie crashes her car that they'd been avoiding them because Frankie made Gerald uncomfortable. She'd come on too strongly, obviously trying to force their friendship, whereas she didn't need to do that. But then we see something beautiful. While Frankie is arguing, Brick is off to the side and he actually makes a new friend by himself. And this is Arlo, played by Nick Shaffer. And it was a really sweet moment. I think Friends, Lies, and Videotapes is a really strong episode. All of the aspects, really thoroughly enjoyed them. Then we come to Season 2, Episode 16, Hex on a Plane. This is directed by Elliot Hegarty. And Sue, who never has any good luck, won a trip to New York. Genuinely won a trip to New York. And it's a trip for 4. And obviously they need to work out what they're going to do with whoever doesn't go. But I love this conversation Mike and Frankie had because it really shows the differences between the character. Frankie said that they were really lucky to have won 4 tickets to New York. And Mike responds, if we're really lucky, we would have won 5. Which sums them up, and I have to say, I'm kind of a glass half empty along with Mike there. That would have been my response as well. They all managed to go, though. They managed to get an extra ticket last minute, and it's absolute chaos at the airport. It's chaos on the aeroplane. Frankie is asking people to switch seats. Don't be that person, Frankie. And then Brick starts to panic because, and I agree with this, he says, I can't make it through a whole plane ride without books. I'm with you, Brick. I could not imagine. Maybe if it's a brief plane ride, but certainly if it's longer than an hour, I think I'd start to lose my mind without a book. Mike has never flown before. I think they could have done a little bit more with Mike being scared, but there was so much else going on that it didn't feel like the episode was empty. And Mike had a great response. I don't know if I agree with what he said, but it was certainly very funny because Frankie says to him, being afraid doesn't make you less of a man, which is fair enough. And Mike responds, and being silent wouldn't make you less of a woman. It's offensive, but it's funny because it's true. And they had a first class ticket, so they spend the episode, everybody switching up. Sue demands the first class ticket from Axel. And while Sue is away, Frankie reads Sue's diary, and then Mike and Frankie get into an argument about control. So Frankie says, right, Mike is in control of the whole trip. She goes off to first class and leaves him in charge. And in no time at all, he goes up to first class and tells Frankie he kind of lost Brick. So then there's more panic and chaos as they try and find Brick. How far could he have gone on an airplane? Well, they find him. He's reading a book on menopause that he took from some woman. And it seems like, fine, everything will be okay for the rest of the flight. And then it goes from bad to worse. There's bad weather. They're being redirected to Pittsburgh. And they get off there. And they're supposed to be getting a bus to New York. And Mike suggests they just go. It's been a long trip. They're not that much closer than they were. Let's just go home. And Sue quite rightly gets irritated by that because she points out that nothing ever good happens to her. Nothing good ever happens to her. And now that it does, it's still bad. And Axel was the first one to say something. And this was so lovely. He said to her, you know what? I kind of want to go to New York. And they all chime in saying, yes, actually, let's go to New York. And they do. And we get this very brief montage of them trying to enjoy New York in this pretty horrific, snowy, stormy weather. And at the very end, they arrive back home. And their final remark is from Frankie. And she says, we are a very lucky family. Lucky we have no money to travel. Which I love. I love traveling. Absolutely love it. But when I come back, I'm exhausted and of the mind that I don't want to travel again for a long time. So she's definitely seeing the silver lining there, and I rather enjoyed it. We then come to Season 2, Episode 17, The Math Class. This is directed by Alex Reid, and we have two parts of the narrative, one focusing on Brick and Frankie and Mike, and one on Axel and Sue. And Axel and Sue are forced to spend time with their aunts, and they happen to mention a time capsule. And then Axel thinks Aunt Edie is dead. And she wakes up, and she's not dead, obviously. And Axel, realizing that time is precious and he was just about to have lost his aunt, promises to go and find the time capsule for her because she buried a time capsule when she was a little girl. She never dug it up again, so they're going to go and do it. And we're in this long car ride. They don't know where they're going. And then we eventually find out that Aunt Edie never buried a time capsule. She remembered that it was something she read in a Nancy Drew book. And of course, Axel, Sue as well, but mostly Axel, very irritated by this because they'd started digging a hole at this point, and they drive back home. But on the journey home, they realise that Aunt Edie actually has a lot of really great stories, and they actually find her really fascinating, and it was really sweet, and I really liked it a lot. And then we have Brick. Brick got a D on his maths test, which is not like Brick. Brick doesn't get Ds. So Frankie visits Miss Rinsky, who is, of course, played by the wonderful Doris Roberts. And Miss Rinsky says, okay, I understand that parents can't always help with the homework because they don't always understand it. I will start a maths class for parents. And Mike and Frankie have to go to this. And it's actually going really well for Mike. Not so much for Frankie. Especially when Frankie has to go to the board to show her working. And on his next maths test, Brick got a D again. In fact, he got a D minus. So Frankie assumes that this must be because of Miss Rinsky. And she has a bit to drink, stays up all night, and emails the principal. And in the morning, she reads this email out to Mike, and initially she's really proud. It's the transition that she goes through from pride to absolute horror at her own words is so funny because she starts reading it out, really confident in everything that she'd said. And the more she reads, the worse it gets. And I can't repeat on YouTube some of the things she called Miss Rinsky, but it went from bad to worse. And understandably, she has to have a meeting with the principal. And we also find out that actually Brick likes his teacher and he only got a D minus because he only answered 3 questions. And the reason he only answered 3 questions is because once they were finished the test, they got some quiet reading time. So he just did 3 questions and decided he was finished so he could read. Frankie goes to see the principal. Turns out she has a file and she has to do a lot. So a really thoroughly enjoyable episode again. Doris Roberts, obviously absolutely fantastic. And in general, I loved every aspect of this one. And then we come to season 2, episode 18, Spring Cleaning. I laughed there because I just remembered how this episode ends. It's it's very funny, but we'll get there in a moment. This is directed by Barnett Kellman, and it's spring break. The Hex are going off to enjoy themselves, and Nancy Donahue is actually bringing in the mail, and she phones Frankie and has to tell her the bad news that while they were out, they'd been robbed. So Frankie and the kids and Mike all come home, of course, and the place is an absolute mess. And it's very quickly established that this is how they left it. They hadn't been robbed. This was just their house. And Frankie declares that this is going to happen no more. She's making everybody clean. And it got to the phase that gave me a little bit of anxiety where they've pulled everything out to organise everything into binning it, donating it, whatever they're doing with it. But it's that phase where they've pulled everything out to organise it. So it's even messier. And that just makes it so overwhelming. And Brick is sitting outside with a table and he's charging people $1 for information. And I thought that was a nice way to bring in a bit of a subplot with Brick working out problems or problem solving for different people. And one child actually asks him, well, we'll come back to that chronologically, actually. I'll talk about that when we get there. But it certainly was an interesting thing to include and definitely helped to bring all aspects of the narrative together, because at that point, the Hex are just taking everything outside. They're taking all of their stuff outside to get it out of the house, and then they'll bring back in what they want to keep as and when. So the Hex are taking out their stuff. Brick is also outside answering questions, and then back in the house, Frankie finds a whole bunch of papers of Mike's, a load of pro and con lists, and then she finds one, that's titled Marry Frankie. And it's a bunch of pro and cons for marrying Frankie. Now, I will say on the one hand, if you want to marry somebody, you shouldn't need to have a pro and con list. You should just feel it. But at the same time, it is also quite a sensible thing to do to make sure you're 100% ready for this. But whatever you do, if you do a pro and con list, don't leave it lying around. Don't keep it, because what if your partner finds it? Terrible idea. Also, I apologize if you can hear a scratching noise in the background. My cat is wearing the cone of shame. She had surgery last week, and hopefully the cone's coming off soon, but she's taken to scratching at it, and apologies if that's distracting. And as I was saying, don't leave the list lying around. Because understandably, Frankie was very upset when she found it, and they start arguing, and Brick actually asks them why people get a divorce. Frankie thinks that Brick thinks they're getting a divorce, but it's actually because in quite an emotional moment, this kid came up to Brick's information table and asked, why are my parents getting a divorce? Heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking. We learn later on in the episode they're not getting a divorce, they're buying him a pony, which was a bit random but helped to lift the mood. And while all this is going on, Axel and Sue are going off to the charity drop-off to dump a bunch of stuff, but there's a sign outside saying, do not leave things after hours. But Axel tells Sue, just leave it and leave. And they do. And then right at the end of the episode, there's a knock at the door. It's the police. Sue thinks it's the police coming for them because they dumped some stuff when they shouldn't have done. Which, to be fair, I would panic in the same way as well. And then it turns out that they said that somebody had just dumped their stuff. The criminals who robbed them just dumped all of their belongings in an alleyway. And because some of their belongings had their names on them, they identified them as the things that were stolen from the Hex house. And they brought it all back. And because it was a quiet day, they managed to rope in a lot of officers, and they all just come trooping into the house carrying the Hex belongings that they just discarded. And I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. A really, really funny end to a great episode. So as I said, this batch of 4 is really strong. It's a really strong batch. I don't know if I can even order these by favourites. I guess the math class, and then spring cleaning, And then I think Friends, Lies, and Videotapes and Hex on a Plane. The last two are kind of tied together, but they're all brilliant. Really thoroughly enjoyed these four, to the point where I'm starting to get a little bit addicted again. I used to binge watch the middle, and then once it finished, I stopped watching it, moved on to other sitcoms, and then I decided to start watching it again to review, and I was really enjoying it. But with these ones, I kind of was getting a little bit addicted again, because I told myself I'll watch one episode a day, and I watched these four in one day. So I'm hoping that I'm a little bit obsessed again, because I'd quite like to binge watch some more of them. And certainly these four season 2 episodes 15 to 18 are an absolute delight.